Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, lovely people. This is Marie Alessi with yet another interview in the Up Spiral Grief series. And today I have the honor to introduce this lovely lady to you, Whitney. I have watched your interview on Dead Talks. It is an interview series. I have been following this gentleman for a really long time because I love what he does. I love the approach to grief that he has. And I have watched your very touching and deeply inspiring story on there. And I reached out to you and said, let's have a conversation. And you're like, all right, bring it on. So here we are. Would you do us the honor to introduce yourself briefly to our audience, please?
Sure. My name is Whitney Lyn Allen. I am author of the newly released memoir called Running in Trauma Stilettos. And I'm also a grief coach, a certified grief educator. I was certified at the end of January, so I just started taking clients recently. So that's what I do now. In my past life, I call it, I used to be a medical malpractice defense attorney. So I'm still a
Wow.
lawyer, but I do not practice anymore. And I'm
Yeah.
barred in the states in Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Wow. That in itself is like a whole story. And I just really love it. I find it so inspiring where you came from, what you've done. So we'll definitely talk a little bit more about your book as well, because the title itself is just so incredible. I really, really love it. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. But I do
Mhm.
want to start with your story so people actually understand what you have gone through. So if you're okay with that, could you share what your story into and through grief looked
Mhm.
like for you?
Sure. So I'll try to keep this as succinct as possible. It's a long
Mm,
story.
mm,
So, as of October 12th of 2021, my husband Ryan and we celebrated our 8-year wedding anniversary. So at the time, he was a canine officer at one of the boroughs near where we lived. He was doing very well with his career. I was working as a lawyer. We had our 3.5-year-old son, Jackson, and I was pregnant, 26 weeks pregnant with our second son, Leo.
mm,
So 2 days after we celebrated our 8-year wedding anniversary, we had been together almost 10 years at that point,
mm,
but married for 8. Ryan got stung by a bee very randomly with
mm,
no history of any allergy to bees in the past.
mm,
And he went into anaphylaxis shock. And due to the shock, he went into cardiac arrest and could not be revived for 20 minutes. So during that time, he sustained an anoxic brain injury. So
yeah,
anoxia is when you are deprived of oxygen to your brain.
mm,
And when that happens, you lose your ability to basically do everything for that when you're down for that long.
yeah,
Um, so they were able to revive him, EMS, the ambulance on the way to the hospital. But unfortunately, it was just too much damage to his brain. So,
mm,
to make a very long story short, we didn't know exactly what his prognosis would be because we were told by the neurologists and the neurosurgeons that with the brain, it's very hard to say what the clinical outcome will be, even based
yeah,
on scans, because
yeah,
sometimes they see people that have bad scans and they do, okay clinically. But they
yeah,
could tell us that he had a severe brain injury from the scans.
mm,
So instead of making the decision to take him off life support because he was in a coma and he was on a ventilator keeping him alive, me, my sister-in-law, mother-in-law decided that we wanted to give him the best chance and see if he would
yeah,
wean himself on the ventilator, hopefully get out of the ICU and go to rehab where he
mm,
could potentially recover.
yeah,
Um, However, unfortunately, it came to the point kind of at the end of like the 5-month mark, when they say, you're kind of stuck at like the um, your progress at that time. They say that if you haven't really made progress during that time, you probably won't, because in the very short period after an anoxic brain injury is when you make the most progress.
Yeah.
So if you didn't make any progress, it's likely you're gonna stay in that state. And
Yeah.
Ryan was in a vegetative state coming around like 5 month mark,
Yeah.
and repeated CT scans of his brain showed that parts of his brain had literally died. So there
Mm.
was no way that he would be able to have a meaningful life, which for him in his state would have been like he would just be in a bed all the time, not knowing where
Yeah.
he is, not being able to feed himself, not being able to do anything.
Yeah.
Um, so I knew, because obviously I knew my husband very well, that
Mm.
he would never want that kind of life. And that
Yeah.
although saying death is the better option is, a lot of people would maybe not understand that unless they've gone through this experience. For us, death for Ryan was the better option. That's how bad of a state that he was in. So we
And
decided to
can I
put
just,
him, yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
I just want to pause you here for 1 second because this is so much to take in, for somebody watching this who hasn't heard your story before, because, I've watched your story and I was so taken away from this whole how random it all started by bee sting with
Mm,
no history, with no knowledge of that there is any allergy towards that. And
mhm.
then how life just flips in one split second, more or less, with something like that. What I want to come back to is you, because we are talking about Ryan here the entire time, but what I want to come back to is you. You just told me
Mhm.
that you were 23, 26 weeks pregnant at your 8th anniversary.
Yeah, so during this
So
whole
that
time,
means you were fully pregnant. You were like,
mhm.
looking after your husband who's in hospital unresponsive, and your pregnancy is progressing. So at the 5 months mark, had you already given birth to Leo?
Yeah, he was like 2 months old.
Wow. Wow. So how on earth, if you don't mind me sidetracking to that for a moment before we come back to the story of Ryan, did you cope with that on your own with your husband in hospital? Can we focus a little bit on you? I'd really love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you go through tragedy and a crisis like our family did,
Mm.
first you're kind of just in shock and fight or flight mode, and because
Yeah.
you just are like, I need to get whatever I need to get done. I need to make
Yeah.
these life and death decisions. Like,
Yeah.
I'm pregnant, so I have to make sure that like I eat and like drink
Yeah.
water, and
Mm. The
it's like
absolute basics. Yeah.
it's
In
just
functioning mode.
survival.
Yeah.
And then at some point it transitions from survival to like numbness. You're just like, okay, let's just like get this done, this hard thing done, so we can move on. Like, because
Mm.
it's just it doesn't stop being hard when you're like in
Yeah.
the hospital and pregnant and like
Yeah.
deciding all these life and death decisions, and like if you should put your husband on hospice. It's like you have to become so numb to it or else you just
Mm.
wouldn't survive. So I feel
Yeah.
like I just went into like numbness mode for so
Mm.
long, like
Mm.
autopilot, just like a robot, like, okay, let's do this, like, let's go.
I hear you. And who supported you with your toddler? Because you had a toddler as well at the same time.
Yeah, so thankfully he was in full-time school. So during the week he was in school from 7 till 5:30. So that's a big chunk of the
Mm.
day.
Mm.
And then I would visit during his school day, and then my mother-in-law would go at night and see Ryan. So
Mhm.
we would be
Yeah,
able
tag team.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, tag team. In the ICU, we were all there because there
Mm.
was more people allowed to visit at the same
Yeah.
time. But when there was more COVID restrictions, because last
Mm.
winter was when there was like the Omicron
Yeah.
variant going around, so it became very strict. So then we had
Yeah.
to split up our visiting.
Mm. Okay. Back to the 5 months mark when you came to the point where you had to make a decision. Can you share that with us, please?
Yeah, it there came a time where they you can't be in rehab forever. in brain
Mm.
rehab. You can only, insurance only pays for a certain amount. And
Yeah.
Ryan had 8 weeks, which is basically the maximum amount that you can get.
Hmm.
So he was like maybe like a couple weeks in, 3 weeks in, and he wasn't progressing. He wasn't becoming more cognitively intact or aware or anything.
Hmm.
And physically, he was deteriorating because when you sustain an anoxic brain injury and you can't move, there are things that happen, like when you don't have mobility in
Yeah.
your wrists and your ankles, you get contractures and you get bone growth that shouldn't be there. Um, you get bed sores, like you get all these things
Mm.
that people don't think about because you're like stuck
Yeah.
in bed all day. And even with the best care, you get a lot of physical ailments.
Hmm.
So it just became very clear that there would be no way that he would want to be in this state. And I didn't
Yeah.
want to take the chance of him like getting really sick and then dying that way because I felt like
Mm.
that would just sustain like more suffering for him.
Yeah.
So that was like the difference between palliative care and hospice. Like,
Mm.
so we were kind of given the option, like, you can put him in palliative care, which would
Mm.
be, continuing life sustaining things like
Mm.
hydration and
Yeah.
his feeds. But if he got sick, you would just let him pass naturally. And like that to me was not really an option because there's no end
Yeah.
in sight.
It sounds very
The
brutal.
It's more brutal. Yeah,
Yeah.
way more brutal. No end
I
in
hear you.
sight. You're like guessing, oh, when is he going to get sick? And then he has to get
Mm.
sick. So he's like ill. And I didn't want that for him. He had already suffered enough. And like the end point is still the same. So for
Yeah.
me, unfortunately, I was like, I want to get this over with, which is horrible to say, but it was
Mm.
true because it would end his suffering.
And it
Um,
is something
so the
so realistic as well. I understand this might sound so
mhm,
confronting for somebody who's never been in that situation, but it is something
mhm,
so realistic. And you were his wife. You could see
mhm,
where this was heading, and you could see where he already was. So,
right.
and yet I can't even begin to imagine what that must mean for you to have to make that decision with your two little ones. It's
Mhm.
incredible how Um, if I, if it's okay to ask, how much was his mother involved in that process? How did you navigate through that together?
Mhm. Yeah, so his mom and Ryan's sister and myself, we were all of us were very involved with
Mm.
these decisions, like as involved as
Yeah,
family can be, basically.
of course.
So they were, we all leaned on each other for support and
Mm.
to just get through it, because that's the only
Mm.
way is
Yeah.
through it. So although there was so much bad in this situation, one of the good things that came out of it was that our bond now and through this shared terrible experience is that we
Mm.
have this really deep connection and
Yeah.
bond through this horrible event.
Mm. That's beautiful, though. I love that. It's. I often talk about that as hidden gifts in adversity, and that seems to be
Mm.
certainly one of those. And I really honor that. I would like to first of all say you're incredible. You really
Oh,
are.
thank you.
Being a mom through all of that. And oh, I'm just having goosebumps all over just thinking about it. So I can't even begin to imagine. There are two more things I want to talk about with you here, though. One of them
Mhm.
being your book. Do you want to share about when did that come about? Because you just published that. Um,
Mhm.
how old are your kids now?
Yeah, so the youngest turned a year old in January.
Wow.
So he's like, what? I don't even know what the math is now. So he's like 14 plus months, and
Hmm.
Jackson is 5.
Hmm.
And my book, Running in Trauma Stilettos, really came out of, um, I just was sharing Ryan's journey as we were going through it, not
Mm.
really out of necessity and survival because there were so many people contacting me that I used
Hmm.
Facebook as the way to
Mm.
communicate updates.
Yeah. Yeah.
And his story just like spread like wildfire because
Mm.
not only were people kind of drawn into the story itself, but also Ryan and his connection to the community. And I guess my writing caught people's attention
Mm.
in the way that I kind of tried to, not even tried, but, you know, just share this really human experience that was really
Mm.
horrible. And I shared that part of it, but I also shared, themes of hope and resilience and
Mm.
all the things
Yeah.
that go hand in hand with tragedy and crisis, because
Yeah.
you don't just have the one, you have the other as
Oh,
well.
I love this so much because not many people talk about this, and this is exactly why I run this interview series, Upscale Grief. There's always
Mhm,
the other side to the story as well, and so often
mhm,
the focus is literally solely um, on the tragedy, on the adversity, as if that isn't heavy enough already anyway. So we really do need to highlight those other sides as well. And I'm really so grateful that you're bringing this up because there is joy
mhm.
in all of that. There is happiness. There is love, so much love. And
Yeah,
you brought a huge bundle of love into this world while
mhm.
all of that was happening. So there's a massive hand in hand of both of that going on in your life. And I love that you share that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So through that sharing, I got
Mm,
hundreds of messages from people not even
mm,
going through the same exact thing that I was, but going through adversities and saying how they could relate in some way. And then, after everything ended, so after Ryan died, I just was so compelled to write about what happened because no one knew all of the, conversations
mm.
behind closed doors and like actually what happened, even though I was doing general updates, like all
Yeah.
the things that happened and all the emotions that we went through. And I wanted to be able to write about grief and trauma and hope and resilience and love
Mm,
in a very real and raw way that I don't think has really been captured in a
yeah.
book. At least I haven't found it
Mhm,
because I don't think people really know what that type of experience is really like because as a society, we don't talk about these things in
mhm.
the open because they're so uncomfortable.
Yeah,
So I wanted to shed light on something that people don't talk about, at least like, you know, at a dinner party, but they'll talk about
yeah,
behind closed doors.
yeah,
So I wanted to talk about all the uncomfortable situations that you go
yeah,
through in grief and trauma and the real emotions behind it. So no one else would have to feel so alone in what they were going
yeah.
through.
I think that is such a big thing in the world of grief. We so often we experience that, and in particular, something uh, where you don't expect it at such a young age in the prime of his life. I had something
Mhm,
similar, although completely different story, but something similar with my husband. He was in the prime of his life, unexpected brain aneurysm, and he was gone literally within an instant. So there are all
mhm,
these unexpected things. And when we hear those stories, we're touched by them and we're drawn in, and then we move on. And we
mhm.
always end up thinking, that won't happen to us. We never think about that. We never think this could happen to us. That only happens to other people, right? So here are we, two
Right.
individuals that probably thought that at some stage as well, that wouldn't happen to us. We don't think it consciously, but it's just there, that thought, this is other people.
Mhm,
And I often share that in my story with Rob, because a fatal accident had actually triggered us to talk about the what if. What would you do if something
mhm,
was to happen to us? But even that was theory. We didn't think that
mhm.
that would actually happen a couple of years after we had that conversation. So,
Yeah.
what really strikes me is the similarities that we have there because I did the exact same thing. I shared the love story of a lifetime with the world and how it happens unexpectedly and how I dealt with grief. I really love that you took all of your experience and shared it in a book. And for those of you listening to this interview right here, we'll be sharing the link to Whitney's book in the comments below, so you can have that pleasure as well. And please do get her book. It's really, really, really incredible to share something so deeply straight from your heart and with all that love that comes with this. Where the focus is not just on the grief but on the love as well. And I really, really, really love that you said that. And with that topic of love, would you like to
Mhm.
share with the audience where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So, oh my gosh. So Ryan's accident
Mhm.
happened in October of 2021. So it's been how many months? October, November, December, January, February, March. Oh my gosh, it's been like 17 months since I really had
Mm,
a husband because
mm,
I would say I always say that he died two deaths because after October
I
14,
understand.
2021, I didn't have him anymore. There was no
Yeah,
support, there was no love, like it was one-sided.
yeah, I get
So
it.
though his physical body was still here, that's such a small part of a person is like
Yeah,
just their body. Actually, it's
absolutely.
like really it's like nothing because
Yeah,
you can't do anything or like
yeah,
communicate. It's just it's unbearable.
yeah.
So for me, after Ryan died, I was, not anxious to find love again, but I was curious about opening myself up to the opportunity of another love story because Ryan
Mm,
and I had such a wonderful marriage and beautiful love story. And I wanted that for myself for a lifetime with Ryan. And, that was
mm,
taken away from me. So I
yeah.
was curious as to, what my second chapter would be like, if I would
Mm,
have another love story after Ryan. So, I started dating after he passed away. And I wasn't expecting to meet somebody that I would fall in love with again and just want to create a life with because
mm,
honestly, I didn't know, I'm
mm.
picky. I had a high
Thank goodness.
bar.
Yeah, and you've
Yeah.
got two sons, so you need to be. It's so like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear that from you, but it's so different when you're in a dating
Mhm.
world on your own, or when you're in a dating world and you've got two little
Yeah.
ones with you. You know.
Yeah. So, I'm picky. I'm coming out of a very like not normal situation with
Mm,
I don't even like to call it baggage but with things that most people at the age of 35 has never dealt with in their lives.
yeah.
So I didn't really think that I would find somebody that would be emotionally available in that way
Mm,
to come into a situation where they know what happened and first be open to sharing grief with somebody like that kind of grief. And then on top of it with two kids and come in and be open to that. But I did very soon after Ryan passed away, I did find somebody that,
mm,
just fit that mold and I was able to connect with and has been so patient and loving with me through like the grief process.
mm,
Because, I think a lot of people think it will end and that's when you should start dating or looking for love again, but like that's not how it works. So
mm,
I didn't want to delay trying to find love again because I
mm,
knew that it would that's a lifelong journey.
yeah.
Um, so, and I knew that someone would just have to be okay with the fact that my grief will be something that I carry with me my whole life, although it
Mm,
will evolve and transform.
yeah.
It doesn't just end, and that's when I'm ready.
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
it's sometimes it's hard, and sometimes things are going really well, and I
Yeah.
think it's really beautiful that I found someone that takes me my best days and my worst days. So,
I really love that, and I think it's so beautiful that you found somebody who was emotionally so available, and I truly believe that your emotional availability happens alongside with grief and through grief and with grief, because as you said, it will stay with you. Everybody's got their different beliefs. I feel it stays with you for a while. I feel that nowadays I treat grief like a visitor. I don't believe that grief will stay with me forever, but that's my very personal belief.
mhm,
And I also, yeah, it's maybe just a different way of looking at it. But my
mhm.
printer is doing funny things and I haven't even touched it, but that's lovely signs. Hello, we're going to butt into the conversation. I love it. For me, it's such a way of how you deal with it in terms of it is part of your life. It becomes
Mhm.
part um, of your essence, who you are. It is part of
Mhm.
you now. It is part of your history, of your story. Whether you want to call it baggage, package, I don't really mind. It really depends on how people look at it, and it is very individual and very personal. But what I love is that I feel there is this emotional, not just availability, but also longing. And so many people said to me, "Oh, how would you ever find somebody after Rob that could, And I'm like, okay, here are two things. First of all, I'm not looking for a replacement for Rob. I am
Mhm.
fully aware of that the next person will be very different. And I do have been in a
Mhm.
relationship after Rob, roughly about 17 months after. And that person was very different, could not compare at all. And yet there was so much love for this person. And the other thing is that I truly believe, also from my personal experience, that there are certain things that you can only heal once you are in a new relationship. So
Mm.
there are things that you can't handle or process in theory. You have to experience
Yeah.
it. And that to me is really, really important that the other person would understand that. And
Mhm.
last but not least, for me, and I would love to hear if you agree with me on that, once you
Mhm.
have experienced a love that big and so deep, it actually just sets the bar. It doesn't mean that you cannot find that anymore. It just sets the bar exactly where it needs to be, that you're like, I would not accept anything below that. Does that make sense? Did you experience that as
Yeah.
well? And that it's not comparing the two people that you love, but the depth of love, the emotional availability that comes with it, the readiness for being in a relationship with everything that comes with it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. It's funny because my boyfriend now is so opposite of Ryan,
Mm,
which is nice because I feel like grief and trauma has changed me so much. So I
yeah,
actually need something different in a partner
yeah.
than I did before.
That's
So my
incredible. I
boyfriend
love that you share
now
that.
Yeah, my boyfriend now is so he's like reserved and calm and cool and collected,
Mm,
and like nothing
mm,
really phases him, and now I'm
mm.
more of that kind of like fiery chaotic
Yeah.
energy, whereas before I wasn't.
Mm,
So I need that, and actually that
mm,
was Ryan, so I kind of
mhm.
grounded him, and now I
Yeah.
need the grounding, and that's what
Oh, I
my
love that.
boyfriend does is, yeah, he like
Mm,
grounds me. So it's like, I don't
bless
know.
him.
I mean, I don't know if the people that are going to see this like believe in a higher power, or the universe, or God, or whatever. But for me,
I do.
I believe that, it wasn't an accident that
Mm,
this person that seems to just be perfect for who I am now, like came into
yeah.
my life. Because
Mm,
I think if I met someone like Ryan now, I'd be like, that's too much because I'm a lot
yeah.
now.
Yeah.
So it's just it's kind of crazy how that works out.
Whitney, I so love your message. I really do. I so much enjoyed our conversation, and I cannot thank you enough for being so open about everything you shared here today. The before, the during, the after, and it's just all part of life. And I love having people here sharing straight from their heart and keeping it so real and not
Mhm.
sugarcoating anything. And to me, it really touched my heart. Your story touched my heart. You touched my heart, and I will make sure that people find the link in the comments underneath this interview to your book as well, or your website if you want that. We can share whatever links you want so people can reach out to you and connect with you and get to read your story. Is there any final words that you would like to conclude our chat here today?
I don't think so. If
Mhm,
anybody wants to find out more and read more about my story, my
mhm.
website is Whitney Lyn Allen, one N on the Lynn, .com. And, you're going to share the link to the book, and I hope
We
they
will.
check it out
We'll
and
also
let me
share the
know
link to
how
your
they like
website.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you being here. And thank you, everybody, for watching. This is Whitney and Marie signing off. Bye for now.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.